All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming out on this. Thanks for coming out on a rainy night. We certainly need the rain, so there is that. My name's Bill Gladden. I'm the executive director at French and Pickering Creeks Conservation Trust. We were founded in 1967 by Sam and Eleanor Morris, and since then we've worked with landowners, townships, foundations, state and county to buy preserves, parks, natural areas, and we hold over 200 conservation easements that limit development throughout northern Chester County, more than 13,600 acres. We work daily to protect the scenic and cultural landscapes that surround you and to create opportunities for you and your families to connect with nature through environmental educational opportunities, public trails at our two signature nature preserves, the Thomas P. Bentley Nature Preserve and Templin Woods Preserve. There's maps of the trails for each of those on the table on your way out if you're interested, so you're welcome to pick one of those up. If you think about it afterwards and realize you forgot to pick one up, we have them online on our website as well. Tonight's lecture is brought to you by our generous 2025 sponsor, Patriot Auto Group. And I just happen to have a sign that we need to return to them. They also sponsored the Iron Tour, and they're sponsoring our auction, which is in November. So if you're interested in that, at Stonewall Country Club, that's one of our major fundraisers once a year. It's a nice party. And we have lots of cool items to bid. If you want to help support us through the auction without going there, we have an online one as well. So hopefully you'll check that out. But about Patriot Auto Group, they do Chevrolet, Buick, and GMC. They're the #1 dealer in Bucks and Montgomery counties. They really pride themselves on being state-of-the-art and treating people like family. I know the owners, and they've been very nice and been very supportive of French and Pickering and very friendly people. They put an easement on their property as well, so they also they do what they practice what they preach. And in terms of our lecture tonight, we're here to discover effective ways to reduce turf grass and incorporate native plants into the landscape to enhance ecosystem function for all flora and fauna, including pollinators. So you can learn practical steps take to increase biodiversity, beautify your property, improve forage, and bring more life to your yard. And I know that there's also a lot of cool stuff over there for you to take a look at that our speaker brought with her this evening. So, and about our speaker this evening, Jessie Schiffler. About 8 years ago, as a Girl Scout leader, she led a program teaching teenage girls about the carbon impacts of growing food. And in the process, she was inspired to start a small vegetable garden and realized the joy of growing plants. That's all right, it's not going to fall any further. Yeah. While at a beekeeping meeting about a year later, she noticed an amazing amount of insect activity on a particular plant. And after some research, she learned that it was mountain mint, a native plant. And that one plant started a life-changing journey of learning about all the wonderful benefits of natives. In January of 2021, Jessie started a local chapter of the national nonprofit group Wild Ones to help spread the message and get native plants out in everyone's landscapes. Help her heal the earth 1 yard at a time. So thank you all for coming out to learn how to do that. And thank you, Jessie.
Thanks, Brad.
You betcha.
This can go down. Okay. So he already gave away all the secrets. I'm Jessie. It's been a long journey, and I'm happy to share a lot of the things that I've learned with you. Part of that process had been beekeeping. It woke me up to paying attention to plants, what they were doing, when they were doing it. And since starting that journey, we've moved more away from honeybees and into native bees, native pollinators. As land owners, we are stewards for our land. We can really affect the things that can share life with us on that land. So native plants is the best way to do that. Let's go. Yeah. Those of you on Zoom, you didn't miss much. We're going to keep going. I've attended dozens of webinars, conferences, and classes on native plants. I graduated from the Mount Cubis Center Ecological Landscape Design Certification Program in 2023, and I dabbled a little bit in landscape design consultation as a side gig. I've also volunteered with lots of great organizations like Natural Lands, Perkium, and Watershed. And I've gotten to talk to very knowledgeable people about plants and insects while clearing invasives and tending seedlings. I hope to share some of my enthusiasm for native plants with you today. We are losing insects and birds and other native animals at an alarming rate. Our highly industrialized agricultural system, with its reliance on an overuse of chemicals, human overpopulation, and subsequent deforestation for housing needs, and our ever-diminishing open spaces are all contributing factors. We as homeowners have a responsibility to be stewards of the earth, improving our biodiversity by planting native plants. We can create the habitat that so many creatures need to survive. If I can do this, you guys can do it too. Put in a little bit of work and plant these beautiful native plants, and you'll reap the rewards of seeing so many wonderful insects. You take the joy in the fact that you can bring life to your landscape, that little piece of earth that you can influence, and it'll make changes to how you see the world. So there are going to be 4 main parts to the speech tonight. We're going to talk about natives versus non-natives. We're going to talk about what those native plants are, how to choose the best plants for your needs, and some simple things you can do to get started. And then at the end, that 4th section is really just a lot of resources, some of which are over here you can take a look at, take pictures of, look for them in your local bookstores. So first things first, what's a native plant? There are lots of definitions for native out there, but I prefer the definition developed by Doug Tallamy because it's the most specific and it talks about encompassing the relationships that come with the plants and the insects, the flora and the fauna, what is happening in the entire ecological community and environment that makes it native. So it doesn't talk about a specific timeline, it's about the relationships. Why are we choosing native plants? Besides that they increase your biodiversity, they also help prevent soil erosion. They improve soil aeration with their large, deep taproots. They sequester carbon to help with climate change, and they help slow and filter storm water runoff. They provide food and habitat for insects, for birds, and they're really beautiful. If you're already going to put in a plant, pick a native plant. Sometimes you may want to put in a native plant that you can also eat. We've got lots of native fruit plants that people like to enjoy the berries from. Plant enough for both of you and all of the critters that are also going to want to share. In the middle of this screen, there's a wasp on a blueberry. A millisecond after I took this picture, that wasp flew off with that blueberry. And I was just amazing because the blueberry was so much bigger than this wasp that was on it, but it probably took it back to feed whatever mama it was feeding. Unlike most other animals, butterflies and moths can only eat certain plants. So native plants provide those host sites, the food that their caterpillars need to eat. Sometimes it's only one plant. Sometimes it can be an entire species or genre. Monarch caterpillars are the prime example, and that most people are familiar with, but almost every larvae of butterflies and moths follows the same rule. Because caterpillars co-evolved with plants, that are trying to defend themselves against being eaten, they only develop the specific chemicals to break down the toxins of specific plants. There are lots of resources out there to show you those lists. So native plants and insects that have co-evolved together for hundreds of thousands of years are building that relationship we talked about why native plants are so important. If you are trying to plant plants to attract butterflies, you don't want to plant a butterfly bush because it's invasive, non-native, and doesn't feed any caterpillars. But you do want to plant maybe one of or all of the plants on this list so that you can get all of those kind of butterflies. And then that's going to change the way you look at the plants you have in your landscape. Instead of looking at a plant and wanting it to be the same every day for the whole growing season, pristine, not any life on it, you're going to start to get excited about seeing these beautiful caterpillars and then the adult forms, the butterflies that come to lay eggs on these plants. You're going to see a little bit of damage on your leaves and think you're feeding somebody, you're providing life for something instead of seeing it as damage or a pest. One of the cutest examples of a butterfly caterpillar that you'll ever see is the spicebush caterpillar. Looks like a little cartoon face, but you'll never see him if you don't have spicebush in your landscape. His secondary host is sassafras, so you could see him on that too. But those two plants, or you won't ever get to see this cute Pokemon-looking caterpillar. So we've got choices, right? You can pick a native plant, or you could pick a non-native plant. Non-native plants may only serve one or two functions that we had talked about with the aeration and the soil erosion. They're typically not host plants. However, some of the non-native plants do make flowers and they make berries that birds could eat. Insects could come to those blooms. And they may provide shelter for bird nests. That's one of the big examples. People say, oh, well, I don't want to take out that multiflora rose because it has bird nests in it. But the cost of having that non-native plant there, especially invasive plants there, is that you're displacing the native species that want to be there. And the native species that wants to be there is going to serve all of those functions instead of just that shelter spot or those less nutritious berries. And you're missing all of those host options and opportunities. And without caterpillars, we're not going to have butterflies, and we'll have way less birds because adult mama birds and daddy birds feed their babies mostly insects, mostly soft-bodied caterpillars. I had seen a meme not long ago on Facebook that showed a colonial-looking man standing in front of a very manicured turfgrass lawn, and it said, "We don't dress like this anymore. Why do we landscape like this?" And it made so much sense to me. You have to change the way you see your yard, change the potential you see in it, see the beauty for providing life. Why fight nature when you can harmonize with it? Lots of resources, especially this Ben Bott's Prairie Up, to get you out there, decreasing your turf grass and being able to enjoy your outdoor living space in a different way. Choosing the right plants is very important. Not every native plant is created equal. You'll hear native plants are easier to grow, or they don't take watering and fertilizing. And part of that is true. If you pick the right plant for the right place, it will want to be there. It may have been there had somebody before you not stopped it from being there. So yes, pick the right plant, put it in the right place, it's going to do well. But just like any baby plant you buy or grow from seed, it will need care in the beginning. You might have to water it if we don't get rain like we just got 10 minutes ago. You have to make sure that it has a good sound start, just like any other plant. And then eventually, it is true that it will need less input. I plant nothing but native plants and I don't water them after they're established that first season. They, as long as I put the right plant in the right place, will use the rainwater that we got, because in this area, over decades and decades and decades and hundreds of years, they've adapted to the climate that we have here. Climate is changing, and that's a little bit of a tricky thing to figure out what you want to do. But overall, native plants take less input if they're put in the right place. Every part of your property can be the right place for the right native plant. Turf grass lawn does not have to be the default. You can have some turf grass. It makes it a great, easy maintenance path for walking to the native meadow you want to check out, or to the woodlands. It's great for your dog to poop on. Kids really do prefer playing in a widely, diversely planted landscape, though. The majority of people's kids are not out there kicking a soccer ball on their 2 acres of turf grass. They go to school, they play there, they do it there, they go to the park. We have maintained spaces for team activities and group play. Kids at home would really love to walk around and watch butterflies and check out the birds that are in the trees instead of kick the soccer ball around, I'm fairly certain. If you want to focus on attracting butterflies, plant those host plants. If you want to attract birds, plant species that do the things birds need. They need to eat berries, they need to eat seeds, they need to feed caterpillars to their babies. So think about the things you want to see in your landscape and plant for that. There are lots of online resources for finding the plants that could have the biggest bang for your buck. Doug Tallamy helped the National Wildlife Federation develop a great resource to find native plants in your zip code. You put the zip code in, it will give you the top 10 most ecologically beneficial plants, meaning it supports the most amount of caterpillars, which then in hand feeds the most amount of birds. And that would be a place to start. If you have 10 acres and you don't know where to begin, put your zip code in, pick some plants from that top 10 list, and start from there. Pollen and nectar sources are an important thing to think about when you're putting in plants to provide for pollinators. Providing blooms from very early spring until late fall is a key to help lots of species live and reproduce. Providing different shapes of flowers and is necessary for different insects that have evolved to access those different shaped flowers. And then providing a bloom time that overlaps so you never have any gaps is another important way to provide for the life in your yard. Then looking for the secret signs of that life is so important. You can find the little nibbled leaves and see that you've had leaf cutters. You can look for the native praying mantis casings and know that you have hunters out there helping to take care of your pests. You can see the different egg masses of the different insects, and it just turns into a safari every time you walk outside. If you really want to make a difference, host plants is the way to do it. These are all examples of different insects that have host plants that then you get to have your outdoor zoo. Deciding how to plant and where to plant. There are considerations that everybody has to take into account that are different on every site that you're going to work on, but it's the same things to think about. Consider what type of soil you have. Most of us have heavy clay soil here. But if you are in a new development, you may have less clay and you've got that backfill that's not super nutrient rich. So you just have to take that into consideration. Your sun, if you're on a new development, again, you may not have any mature trees. Some of us are fortunate enough to have some mature trees to work with. That's a good starting point. Consider the size that you want to overall tackle. If you have a 10-acre property, you're not planting the whole 10 acres at the same time. So think about the size that you're going to be working in, and then what your goals are, those things we talked about, what you're trying to attract to your property, what you're trying to support. The options to prepare your site, you can use the smother method. which we'll talk about a little more. You can use a sod cutter that can be expensive, and it's also very labor intensive. I don't recommend tilling, though it can be applied in the appropriate way if you're doing a large area. And solarizing is another way that you can do smaller areas to start. You can use a combination of these methods over time. Not every one of them is right for every site condition, but you can use multiple and kind of stack the projects together to make a bigger impact. And then you're going to plan for all of the seasons: winter, the early spring, the late spring, summer. The end of summer is sometimes considered the dearth period, where there's not a lot that people think of as blooming, but if you put the right plants in, you don't have to have a period of no blooms. And then the fall. Planting the right plants in the right place to meet your soil conditions, your sun conditions, the size of your plot, how big those plants are eventually going to get, and how much money you have to spend on them, along with all of those things that you're trying to take into consideration that you want to have come and live with you on your property. Planting in different layers is very important. Plant communities so that you can cover the ground with plants that will stabilize the soil and hold that space all through the seasons, so that when your shrub layer loses its leaves and your trees lose their leaves, you don't have bare soil underneath. That shrub layer will provide for the seeds and the berries for the birds. The understory canopy trees will help to shade out certain non-native plants that want to grow in, and then your canopy trees provide that overall structure in your plantings. One of the easiest ways to start planting is to pick a tree that you already have in your property and plant under it. Find some plants that like that part shade or shade, either dry or moist soil, depending on what's under your tree, and start there. Then you don't have to be mowing your lawn right up until the tree trunk. You've provided this buffer system. Even better if your tree is hosting caterpillars that are going to potentially fall down from those leaves, that they want to get into the soil to go to their next life cycle. And instead of mowing them over, you now have these plants providing a soft landing for them to be protected by. Solarization, we touched on it briefly, but it is the idea that you're going to use black plastic to cover a larger section of your property over the hot months of summer to kill off the turf grass and the mixed seed bed that might be there, so that you can plant native seed mix typically in the winter, late fall or early winter, for best germination rates. Ernst Seed is a great company within PA that provides a very good website, detailed information about the types of seed mixes you may want for your property. And you will follow their planting instructions, but most of their seed mixes need winter stratified, so they have to be put out in the cold of winter to go through multiple freeze-thaw cycles with the snow and the rain that we get in those colder months, so that it breaks their seed coats and allows them good soil contact to germinate in the spring. Smothering with cardboard is a great option for people who have a smaller area that they want to work with, or access to a lot of cardboard. Covering, you would mow the grass in the area you want to convert into a bed or a planting, mow it low, cover it with cardboard, and then you can use leaf mulch or hardwood chips over that cardboard. It's recommended by many sources to wait approximately a year for that bed to do that thing, but I have done it the same day with great results. So you do not have to wait. It's just recommended because it gives it time for the turf grass to die underneath there, and you have a little less weeding in the beginning if you wait. Sod cutting, again, it takes that whole top layer off. You can plant immediately, but it's a lot of disturbance and it's a lot of heavy lifting. And I don't recommend tilling at all unless you're going to be doing tilling with a seed drill. And Ernst Seeds has a great place to look on their website about how those steps would happen, but most of us don't have access to that type of equipment to do this the right way. Because otherwise, if you're just tilling with your garden tiller, you're creating a lot of disturbance and kicking up all those seeds that are in the soil waiting for sunlight. So you're just going to be fighting a lot of weeds for a long time. If you're looking to do the solarization method, though, this would be something to start thinking about for next year, because we're past the hottest part of the season now. But in May, you would mow that area low to the ground. You would cover it with plastic, and it's important that you cover all of the edges. You want to really trap that heat in under the plastic. Leave it covered for 3 to 4 weeks. In July, you would uncover it for 2 weeks. Sunlight's hitting it. If it rains, it rains. It's going to let any seeds that have so far survived grow for a couple of weeks, and then you're going to cover it back up again for 2 more weeks. You're baking it again. You're baking those things that did make it to the surface. You're killing them off. In September, you'll uncover it again. You can rake away the debris and sow your native seeds in October, November. The timelines can be pushed back a few months depending on what you're doing. I have some examples here of how it looks. It's unsightly while you're preparing for it, but this was happening in May of 2020. We did this on our property. We uncovered it then in July for 2 weeks. We raked back the dead growth there so that everything had a good chance to get sunlight and see what would still survive. And then we actually left the tarp on for a long time after that. We only uncovered it in January, and the ground was frozen. I don't know if you can tell from these pictures, but the ground was frozen. So when we raked back the little bit of debris that was still there, it was kind of icy. We used a clay-based kitty litter and mixed it with the Ernst Seed Showy Northeast Native Wildflower and Grass mix that was the closest match to our site conditions. And then we sprinkled all those seeds and we covered it with just a very thin layer of leaf mulch, just to protect it from the seeds blowing away. We put this fence up just so the dogs wouldn't run through it, but it wasn't like a very protective fence. And 6 months later, in June, we had our first growth. It was a noticeable difference. There are a lot of asters and young perennials that started in there. I have to say I never saw very many grasses come to this meadow from the showy perennial and grass mix. The perennials really kind of took over. That first season, there were a lot of perennials that grow quickly, so they take hold quickly. This is Coreopsis that is known to like disturbed sites and grows quickly. So they put it in a lot of seed mixes so you don't have to wait quite so long to see some blooms. Through September, I I had mowed it twice, and I think that I mowed it too low the first time. So I would recommend either just, if it's a space that is manageable, just cutting by hand, maybe at 6 to 12 inches, or if you have access to one of the higher field mowers that can mow high, I would recommend mowing higher rather than low. So through this year, you can see how the asters have moved in. There's some sunflowers in there. In January, in the middle of winter, there's seeds in there for the birds to eat. This is still the first year, it's still establishing, and it was still way more fun to look at than the turf grass that it had been prior to that. The next summer, lots of asters just waiting to take over and bloom. That's October, when turf grass would have been there doing nothing. And here it's covered in those late season pollinators. So that's a year and a half later, right? Almost 2 years later. Lots of asters, it's beautiful, full of life. And then that was just a couple weeks ago. So it took 4 years to be this beautiful, full of life replacement for a section of turf grass that I didn't want to mow anyways. Be patient though. The smaller the plants, the less risk of transplant shock, and the better rooted in its home soil it will become. It's way cheaper too to buy small plants. So if you have access to, there are lots of plant swap groups on Facebook where people are looking to rehome their native plants. The first year, it's not going to look like it does much. It's sleeping. The root system is really trying to establish. That's where all its energy is going. The second year, you're going to see a little bit of growth, but it's not going to be super impressive. And you're going to be like, what's going on? And then the third year, it just goes crazy. Plants will triple or double in size. And I'm talking even small trees that you put in as little sticks will just take off that third year. So this was a little section that I was able to do by desodding. I just hand scraped with a flat shovel to get the turf grass up. That's a lot of soil disturbance, but I planted immediately some seed-grown plants and gave it a little border so that it looked intentional. And this was 6 weeks later from transplanting the little seed starts to this bed, 6 weeks, and it just flies by. And then a few months later, I'd added a couple trees, and it looks like an established planting. This same spot now looks unrecognizable. That little pagoda dogwood tree is gigantic, and it's been 3 years. So things really just change and take off quicker than you would think. And while it feels like it's taking a long time, every day you get to go out there and see how it changes and what's attracted to it now, and how the plant you thought should go here kind of moved over here, and it's fun to watch the changes all during that time. Another eco-friendly way that you can provide site prep if you have chickens. I had used chickens to clear this bed. I kind of put a little temporary fence around it, told the girls, hey, here, and they cleared it of all the turf grass in the area, but they ate around the violets. So the violets stayed there. They don't like violets apparently, which is a bonus. And they also, because they're eating, they're pooping, so got my own free fertilizer in this section here. Planted a couple of arrowwood viburnums, and on the right, I think this is the angle, there is a sumac. The following spring, there's some mixed native grasses in there: primrose, monarda, goldenrod, black-eyed Susans, bee balm. All through the spring and summer, I've got blooms there. And in the winter, it even provides things to look at, because I don't cut down all my stems. I let them there for the birds and the insects that need those hollow stems. But there's multiple seasons of interest just in this one bed. And then a couple of years later, you can see how everything's just fills in and expands. 2 years after planting, those big sumacs, instead of just being a stick, are now a tree. Another year later, so 3 years after planting, and this is looking more like a woodland than just that section of turf grass that had been there previously. Now, talking 4 or 5 years later, it is a little woodland. You can walk down a wooded path in this section where just those chickens had cleared that turf grass. So 5 years makes a huge difference in native plants and establishing these little plant communities. When you're thinking about what to plant where, look at what you have already. If you have a lot of spring bloomers, maybe put your attention into adding plants that will bloom later in the season, in the summer or in the fall, so that you're filling those gaps of what you don't have. Remember that you want to try and fill all of the vertical layers. You want to fill the ground layer, the shrub layer, the understory tree, and the canopy layers, so that not only are you filling the space horizontally, but vertically. Put as many plants as you can in there, because you're trying to make up for all of the things everybody else isn't planting, so you can fill it all in. And then you won't notice if the rabbits munch on this or that, and if the birds take some of your blueberries, because you have lots more. When you're looking for plants, it's best to go to native plant nurseries that are focused on native plants and that are trying to provide you with the straight species of plants. I am noticing more just your general garden centers and nurseries are starting to carry some native plants, but you have to be careful about what they're saying on the tag. If they're giving you a plant with a fancy name that will have the what am I trying to say? Like the purple coneflower, Echinacea purpurea, and then it has avalanche in not quotations, but the single marks. That is a cultivar. Not all cultivars are bad, but if they've changed the leaf color, if they've changed the bloom size or shape, sometimes even the bloom color, those are things you want to steer clear of. The insects that are looking to use these plants need to be able to recognize them, right? So if you've changed the leaf color, chemically they're different. The insects don't know that that's the plant they need to lay their eggs on. Their caterpillar can't overcome those new chemical defenses. So stick with the same leaf color. If they've changed the bloom color, some studies are showing that the insects don't recognize them. They have evolved to recognize a white bloom, and if they're not finding a white bloom at that time when they're looking for it, they're not picking up the signal that it's just a pink cultivar that is supposedly the same plant. So if you can stick to the cultivars that have only really changed the overall plant size, so you're getting a arrowwood viburnum shrub that blooms at the same time, it just stays smaller. The overall plant size stays smaller, then you're sticking with an okay cultivar, which could be appropriate for a smaller plot, a smaller landscape. But pay attention to what changes they're making. Mount Cuba Center has some good research on different cultivars and how they behave in your landscapes. So if you're in question, you could always check their website and see what they say about the cultivar that you're thinking about getting. This is an example of a cultivar on the left of 9-bark. It's the Diablo cultivar. It's very popular in the trade. And then on the right is the straight species. So you can see they're planted directly across from each other. So it gave a really great first-person idea of the difference in these plants. On the left, much less blooms, and barely any seed set because pollinators were not attracted to it. Whereas on the right, full of flowers, full of pollinators that visited it, and it sets the prettiest seed heads all through fall that the birds eat. If I were a bird, I would just have a buffet on this plant alone. Such pretty little seeds. But it was a really good example for me. And the plant on the left now, this has been several years since this picture was taken. The plant on the left is dying. And I'm okay with it because it's a cultivar, but I have many volunteers of the straight species on the right, so I can more than make up for the one plant on the left that's not doing great. You want to, when you're thinking about what plants to put in, design for a problem you might be having in your property. So if you have a lot of rainwater runoff, maybe plant a rain garden so that you are putting in plants that like a lot of water. If you have a section that has some mature trees and you just want to add plants to that area, get plants that want to be in a woodland setting. If you have open turf grass like I had, put in meadow plants that want full sun so that you can just increase the plant diversity in the settings that you have and solve the problems that you have. This is just some examples of the timeline of plants and how quickly plantings can become what you want, because if you're trying to plant a lot of things on a budget, you're going to get small plants. It's going to not be the end goal yet, right? You have to plant for the end goal. So in this area where this picnic table was, I had wanted to make a room, and this was like the table of the room, and I wanted it to be private and be an adventure to find. So I chose some fast growing trees, sumacs, some smoke trees, and some hazelnuts. And that first couple of years, you could clearly see the table. It was not an adventure. It was also not a room yet. But as the trees grew over a couple of years, it was quickly becoming a very private and adventurous place to go, because you could no longer see where it was. It along the path just kind of showed up. And now it's fully established. It's a fully wooded, this is, I forget the timeline, 5 years, 5 or 6 years. Now it's a room. You can clearly see that it became a room. On the left is actually a teepee that you may have noticed in previous pictures, that you could clearly see the wooden beams. Now you can't. They're fully covered, and it's a nice little hobbity hideaway. You can be very detailed and organized and very formal in your design. You can do a drawing on paper. You can plan all of your bloom times. You can put those plans into place, and it looks very formal and lovely. And then if you're like me, because I can't say no to a good volunteer plant that wants to come up and spread, you will quickly fill that space, and it becomes less formal because the plants are happy. They want to fill in all that space. I never have to mulch again. My plants are my mulch. I don't clear away all of their debris in the fall. I let that break down and add to the soil, which then their seeds are there, and anything the birds don't eat are going to grow into plants again. And then by this time of year, it's looking a lot like chaos. There's goldenrods that are blooming out of control. There are asters, and I could go in here with a much heavier hand and trim out some of those things, but at what cost? Then my pollinators aren't getting all of those late season blooms that they really need. And if I take away all of the growth, then the hollow stems that they need to overwinter in aren't there either. So I kind of let the plants decide where they want to be and how they want to behave. I take out the invasive plants that grow, and otherwise I let the native plants do their thing, because I'm doing the best I can, putting the right plants in the right place. I research and think this plant's going to be happy. But if something else, another native plant moves in there, I don't think I know better than that plant what should be there. I let them figure it out. If you don't know much about design, there's a lot of great resources. You can pretty much copy a design that somebody else has come up with for your growing conditions, and you could use the same plants they use, or you could use substitute plants just within their design. Yeah, there are just lots of resources that you can search online if you don't know how to go about putting plants in a design. There are mail order companies that you can order a whole garden from. Just be careful where you're ordering from. Prairie Nursery is a great organization, but they deal with a lot of Midwest plants. So if you're getting plants that are on your list that are listed as local here, that are native here, but they're grown in the Midwest from seeds that have been collected from the Midwest, they may just function a little differently here than they would if you had gotten plants from a native nursery here that grew from seeds here. The timing of blooms may be a little different. Their heat tolerance may be different. The humidity here is different than in the Midwest, so they may just not react as well as they would if you'd chosen plants from a more local source. Hungry Hook Farm is a local source. She used to do these garden kits, but I think as of this coming year, 2026, she's only going to be selling seeds. Still a great resource, especially if you're looking to do winter seed sowing, things like that. So you can do all of that planning. You can be very formal in your design, or you can rescue a bunch of leaf bags from people who are trying to put baby caterpillars in the garbage. You can let them sit on a site that you're going to plant in, and you can slowly acquire plants for a couple of months while you're doing other projects, and then you can assemble them all together and throw them in the ground. And beautiful things happen. They look lovely. It's less turf grass, so you really can't go wrong there. This is a couple of problem areas in my yard that I tackled. When we moved into our property, we realized pretty quickly that both sides of the narrow property were swales from the subdivision. And so when it would heavy rain, we would just have rivers of water running down the sides of our property and out into the street. And so I wanted to do something about that. So I planted these bioswales to help absorb all of that water, slow it down, and keep it from rushing off out into the street. So I picked a lot of plants that like moist soil and that don't mind having saturated soil for a day-ish. It's not a standing swamp or anything, but they can go a day with a little bit of surface water. And it evolved beautifully. Each step of this bed has been just a joy. A lot of things are very different now as the years have gone by, but I basically planted the garden bed and then I added to it using the cardboard method, and I did a bunch of plugs. So I expanded the bed. Instead of tackling a different area, I just expanded something that I already had. That way the impact looked bigger. A couple years in and things are really taking off. And then some Japanese stilt grass moved in. So I very thankfully caught it early and have not had any, well, I think I pulled like one this year, but I pretty much eradicated it that first year. It must have come in on something that I had planted, I think. But in the fall, brown's a color. It feeds the birds. You see all sorts of birds all winter pecking around in all those seeds. The next year, there it is, providing habitat, food, collecting all that rainwater. I do not, most of the time, have water running off my property anymore. Both sides are heavily planted now, and it's noticeably different. And this is what it looks like in the summer. That same bioswale, just full of life, and the dead tree in the background, because dead trees are important too. So this was the other side of the property. The other bioswale, you can see the water mitigation problem. That doesn't happen anymore. Put all of those little plants in, tiny little sticks of things that you just have. You're like, how are you ever going to be an actual tree? And it happens. So this, I didn't do any site prep except that I had mowed the grass and I dug right into it. I flipped over the turf right at the dig site to try and, because look, if it was going to rain, it was going to flood, right? And I didn't want all those plants to just flood away. So I flipped over the turf to create a little berm on the downgrade side to keep all those plants in place. And so this is what it looked like. I just cleared out the little bit of soil or the turf around each of the plantings, planted them in. Woo, we're jumping ahead, but planted them in that same year, already a lot of growth. A year later, very full. In the winter, lots of interest. But as the years go by, it just keeps getting better and better and bigger and fuller, and none of that runoff water. Now, as much as I love this, no one design that you pick, just because you picked it doesn't mean that it always needs to stay that way. Because this is what that area looks like now. I decided, there's turf grass there. I could take that out and put a pond in instead. So all those plants that you saw are still in the background. I didn't remove any of the plants except for the turf grass and added a pond in there. I decided, because there's still that potential for all that runoff that I've tried to mitigate with all the plants, I didn't want all that runoff to go into this new pond. So I did do a berm on the backside of the pond also to keep runoff from going directly into the pond. I didn't want all that sediment and soil runoff. So it's just, things can evolve into whatever you want them to be and try and solve whatever problems you're personally having on your property. When you start with a property like this, when we moved in, it's hard to wrap your head around, how am I going to get rid of all of this turf grass? But as you've seen through all of these examples, you just do it a spot at a time, and then you add to it, and then you expand it, and then maybe you change it, or you let the plants fill in. So from summer of 2013 to September 2022, you can see a lot of that turf grass is gone, just by putting a bed here, a bed there, connecting them. The goal is to have nothing but paths that lead to all of the different places. Through the winter, still fascinating to see all of the life that comes to all of those different spots, because there's stuff there for them that wouldn't be there with just turf grass. Fortunate enough to have a friend who could do a drone overhead view and see how different from, full turf grass to this fun mess of a native plant place is. And then this was just in July. So I can no longer look out my window and even see everything. I have to go out there and adventure and explore so that I can find what fun stuff is visiting me. So some quick ways to get started. Shrink the lawn. Mow less, start under your trees, expand your bed, leave dead trees. Those are snags. When you can. If it's not safe, take it down. but think about leaving as much of that trunk as you possibly can. Leave the leaves and the stems. Weeds are friends. We're gonna replace non-natives, pull out those invasives whenever you can, and you can grow from seed if you can. So I think most people recognize that turfgrass lawn is just a waste of space for the most part. People waste water, they waste money on chemicals and on repeatedly seeding. A lot of the fertilizer that's applied to lawns ends up in our waterways. And if you've never read Doug Tallamy, Nature's Best Hope is the key factor for changing the way I looked at all plants. So I highly recommend it. Planting under and around trees provides those soft landings, decreases your mowing, makes it easier. Instead of making tight circles, you can make ovals or longer, gentler circles, but you're providing habitat. This was a dead tree that I decided to plant under, and I planted some vines that then took over this whole section. So they're definitely providing a lot of hiding places for bees and bugs and birds. If you're trying to plant under mature trees, small plants is the way to go. You don't want to make big disruptions in your root systems, so you can get very small containerized shrubs that like shade. You just want to put them in smaller and a little bit further away from the trunk of the tree so that you're not disturbing those well-established root systems. Some trees like maples have a shallower root system anyway, so it is trickier to plant under them. But this is a maple. I did plant under it. Everything did well. But other trees have a deeper root system that you're not going to disturb as much. So just knowing which plants you're planting under and what to expect will help you make some good decisions. And if you put your shovel in and you hit a root, move to the left a little bit, move to the right, like just maybe be a little more forgiving of the design you have in mind to work around the roots that you have to work around. Allow for succession. This dead tree provided a really great framework for this volunteer red cedar plant that a bird had given us. And it just looked like such a lovely piece of art for the first few years that that cedar was growing. Now you can barely see that dead tree at all. The cedar is 8 feet tall and fills the whole space. But it was fun watching that happen. There's a lot of life that depends on dead wood for food, residence, and as a breeding place for well over 1/10 of life on land. Each decay stage has its own flora and fauna, and many nutrients pass through dead wood and the soil back into the natural cycle. So when you can leave dead wood, definitely do so, whether it's still standing as a trunk or laying down. A lot of times I'll use dead wood to border a new bed to show that intention. You can take advantage of the shade that other trees cast. It doesn't have to be directly under them, but where their shadow falls to plant a bed that prefers some part shade. This was a part shade bed that I had installed because that is the way that the tree provided the shade. So it's not close to the tree, but it's in its shadow. And that's how it just matures and grows and changes. You can, when you're deciding where to start, I've got all of this turf grass, what am I going to do? Where am I going to start? Pick a spot that's easy to mow around. The wider the better. There are lots of species that will naturally like to grow on an edge habitat. So picking the plants that want to grow in an edge habitat, if you're expanding a bed that is backed up against trees, those are the species you want to go for. Consider the mature size of plants, but not every plant that either volunteers or that you plant needs to necessarily reach its mature size. Maybe it will. Maybe you're going to pick an oak, it's going to be a centerpiece focus, and you're planning for a 300-year lifespan of an oak. But I have lots of volunteer oaks the squirrels have given me. They never put it in a great spot. That oak can stay there for as long as I can let it stay there. It's not going to reach 300 years, but it might reach 10, and then it's too big for the space. I need to cut it down, or maybe I just top it and it becomes a shrub oak in that space. So while it's important to know what the lifespan of your plant is and the mature size, know that you don't always have to make every decision based on a 300-year lifespan. Some plants just aren't going to meet that potential, and they wouldn't have met it in the forest either. Not every oak is going to live 300 years in the forest. Beavers take them down, other trees fall on them. So you're just kind of replicating what nature might do, just more on your scale. Pick your ground covers, your herbaceous plants, your shrubs, your trees. When I make a planting, I usually plant the entire community at the same time. Those first couple years, it's tricky because when the shrub that you're putting in, it likes part shade, and in 10 years it will have part shade. Those first couple years it's not going to if the tree you're putting in beside it is about the same size, right? So it's a tricky thing, but for the most part, they all figure it out. And you just can limb up the tree. You can provide some artificial shade, potentially with tenting or staking, until you get over that hump and the tree that you planted as your community with your shrubs is doing the thing that you knew it was going to do and that you planned for long term. I recommend hardwood mulch, leaf mulch, or coconut coir. No plastic mulch, no stones. Unless you have a very dry, like you're going for a desert kind of a landscape, but we don't really have that naturally here, so I would never recommend that. And then you can add a border of rocks, branches, bricks. You'd be amazed at the amount of people that will give away all of these fun landscape things if you just are looking in the right place and not afraid to lift a whole bunch of things in a minivan that is tired of lifting and lugging things for you. And then you can expand that bed over time. There are lots of times that I border a bed and then the plants are happy there, they expand, and so I just move the rocks out, and now the bed is bigger, the plants did it for me, I don't mulch again. It's really nice when the plants will do the work. We are almost done. So this is just how the plants mature, leaving the leaves, they disappear, there are lots of insects living in them. Because I don't take down the canes, I get to look for these signs of euthecas and of birds that ate the bugs that were trying to make it through winter. There are resources on when to cut back stems and when not to cut back stems. Heather Holm is a really good resource for those specific things. Instead of having a weed-free or mulch-filled bed with no plants in it, I let violets and things like that fill that space so that even in early April, I've got lots of color in the landscape. And then those plants give way to this. It's the same bed just a few months later, and new blooms are going to be happening. So the plants play fairly well together. You don't have to worry about them out competing for the most part. Or if you do, put a bunch of thugs together and they will battle it out. Don't put a dainty plant who doesn't like any competition next to your asters, or they will not make it. Late summer, lots of bloom, no dearth in sight. And then lots of pictures through the different seasons, seeing how they evolve and the fun critters that live there all winter. Cues to care is an important idea for people to keep in mind if you are fighting against the norm in a neighborhood that has a lot of turf grass or you have neighbors whose opinions you care about, letting them know you're not making careless choices. You're making decisions to steward your land in a way that harbors life, that you're not just letting your turf grass go to invasive plants to spread everywhere. Signs are a good way to do that. Paths that are delineated are a good way to do that. Just letting them know you are taking care of this land. It just looks different, and we're trying to have it look different. It's intentional. Weed, by definition, is a plant that's not valued for where it's growing. This picture, the top left, is Joe Pye weed. It volunteered right beside my pool. So when I get to float on a raft and see all of these beautiful plants around, this is a weed. It's weed in its name. It just needs better PR because it's a gorgeous plant. And it was free. So that's even better. A lot of what we term weeds, or even that are named common name weeds, help prevent soil erosion. They are providing food for lots of things. There are naturalized weeds, which means they're non-native here. And while you would not intentionally plant them, you don't have to poison them, and you don't really have to eradicate them if they're in your turf grass lawn, because you're just increasing the biodiversity of a non-native plant anyways. Your turf grass, why would it need to be a monoculture? It's already not native and it's not providing anything. If you let the creeping Charlie bloom in it, at least there's some blooms that some things can use. The violets are a native plant that a lot of people I've heard will pull out of their flower beds, or they will pull out of their turf grass, which is just crazy to me. But let those things there, providing for all of the other insects. Down in the bottom left, one of my favorite plants, and I'm sorry for anybody who has seasonal allergies, it is ragweed. It's a native plant. It is an annual plant. It grows to like 10 feet tall in one growing season, blooms and sets seed, and then feeds the birds all winter. So I have a bird feeder growing right outside of my windows, that I get to watch the birds come, and I don't pay a single cent for any seed. And it's just always teeming with life. And then fleabane, they're annual and biennial species, but they volunteer freely. So why would I discourage that? These happen to be two weeds that I let grow to see what they would become, and one was boneset and one was goldenrod, and full of pollinators at the end of the season. Before I knew better, I planted with those plants that I could find at Lowe's. And then when I learned more, I pulled them out and replaced them with native plants. And at first I was worried that my poor chickens wouldn't have any privacy to do their work. But with the help of the wild birds planting elderberry, this area quickly filled in, and I didn't have to worry very long about privacy. So the trees get bigger, the plants get bigger, elderberries keep on volunteering. You can winter seed sow. There are lots of resources to do that. A lot of native plants need that cold, moist stratification period over winter. So winter seed sowing outdoors in pots protected from critters can get you a lot of free native plants, or cheaper native plants, in the spring. Wild Seed Project is a great resource for learning how to do that. You can start small, or, collect milk jugs and go big. BONAP is the #1 resource for looking to see if the plant you're looking at is actually native to this area. Regardless of what shelf it's on, in which nursery, does it actually grow here naturally? You can put in the plant's botanical name, so the genus and species, and then BONAP behind it in a Google search, and it will bring up these maps that you can check to see for sure which areas the plant actually grows in naturally. These are some pictures of winter seed sowing, just on a smaller scale. And the plants that they can produce, and then that garden that they got to go into. If you have a greenhouse, you can do just like your vegetables. There's some plants that don't need winter seed sowing, and you can do them in a greenhouse too. So like Doug Tallamy says, plant native plants. This is just lists of resources. So if you're interested, you could take some pictures or come kind of toggle through them at the end. A lot of these things are over on the table to take pictures of. And I'm just going to leave with my favorite quote from A New Garden Ethic. Your garden is a protest. It is a place of defiant compassion. It is a space to help sustain wildlife and ecosystem function while providing an aesthetic response that moves you. For you, beauty isn't just petal deep, but goes down into the soil, further down into the aquifer, and back up into the air and for miles around on the legs and backs of insects. You don't have to see soil microbes in action. Just knowing it's possible in your garden thrills you. It's like faith, and it frees you to live life more authentically. Your garden is a protest for all the ways in which we deny our life by denying other lives. Plant some natives. Be defiantly compassionate. And with that, I say thank you for your time. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
We record all the lectures as well, and we have those on the website. We should have this one up in a couple days. So if there was something too that Jessie went through that you want to sort of find back again, you'll be able to do that way too. We'll just check real quick and see if there was any questions from the folks remotely. No open questions. So given the time, I just would encourage you to come up and ask any questions and browse the tables. And thank you all for coming out, and go plant some native stuff. Yeah.